Sorry? Tell you when.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. Neil, do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Adrian Mather and Caroline Smith, and Chris Cook and Andy Siu Hung are here as substitutes, and I believe that Mark Brunel Walker may be arriving later.
Or he may not. It's a slim chance, I think. Okay. Do we have any comments on the minutes of the previous meeting, which I expect you've all read in great detail? Quick show of hands, if you all agree with them, who were here. Okay, thank you. Minutes are approved. Okay. Yeah, are there any declarations of interest? Sorry? Declarations of interest. And are there any questions?
No questions from the public, town and parishes or councillors, Chair.
Great, thank you. Right, that means we can get on with our first item, which is the final report on the council plan of 2020 to 2025. And I think Stephen's going to introduce it.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Yes, you're familiar by now, I think, with the new council plan, which will take us beyond 2025. It's been through this committee, I think, at least once, maybe twice, 3 times, is it twice? I knew it had been through several times, and I think I seem to recall sitting here talking about that new council plan, and it will be going to executive on Thursday and on to council the following Thursday. But what we're looking at this evening is not the new council plan, but the one that it will replace, the council plan that ran from 2020 until now. It's had a couple of refreshes in 2022 and 2024. In 2024, to enable it to continue in existence until the new council plan was ready. And that new council plan was going to be, and has been, and is informed by the community's vision 2035, which is, as I'm sure you're all aware, our co-produced document that sets out the ambitions of our community for how they want Wokingham to be over the next 10 years. And that, co-produced and led by volunteers with the council facilitating the process, is an important expression of what our residents wish for, and we wanted to make sure that was a big influence on the new council plan. So that was why this plan, the plan we're looking at now, the old plan, was extended for a year to enable that work on the community's vision to be completed. So this is an opportunity really to reflect on the achievements of the last 5 years. Those achievements, of course, span 2 different administrations, so there's no party political points, I think, that need to be made here. This is the council's plan, initiated by the previous administration and continued by the current one, and the achievements are very clear. During that period, the council has had some really substantial challenges. It, at the beginning of that period, obviously faced the enormous challenge that the world faced with the COVID pandemic. So this council plan was born in the period of the pandemic, and the pandemic was a major challenge for the council and all institutions in this country and many others. We then faced the war in Ukraine and the inflationary impact of that, which hit us very hard in the course of 2022. And we seem to have moved from challenge to challenge to challenge in the period since. And I fear they're not yet over. So that's the background, really, to looking back on this old local plan and what it set out to achieve and what it did achieve. And I'm just going to ask Louise, and maybe Emily, if she wants to chip in, just to say a bit about the structure of the plan, which might facilitate your discussion of it.
Thank you, Stephen. I will just add a couple of points, if that's okay, Chair. So it's been set out looking at the strategic priorities that were set in that previous council plan. So safe and strong communities, enriching lives, a clean and green borough, right homes in the right places, keeping the borough moving and changing the way we work for you and being the best that we can be. So those were the different priorities that were set within it. And if you're looking at the structure of the report that we've put before you, within the covering report, we've sort of highlighted some of the key achievements. And then in the appendix, which is to the back of the report, which starts, I think, on page 21, we've tried to go into more detail, looking at each of those particular areas and looking at those achievements. Just a couple of things just to point out, and things that we've been learning, obviously, as we have been looking at the new council plan and on our reporting. We've obviously had quite a lot of discussion about challenges and how we report on things that are not only positive, but perhaps things that have been more challenging and things that haven't been achieved. And I think we've taken that as a big learn, that as we go forward with our reporting on the new council plan, we'll be making sure we've got that balanced view when we look through and look at the achievements. And also, from a notable point that was made was making sure that the KPIs that we have for the council are also set around that council plan. So again, when we come forward with that new reporting, again, it's just learning from the overview and the points that you've made over the past year for us, and just sort of saying that we've taken those into consideration. There wasn't anything else I particularly was going to raise, but obviously we will try and take questions if we can, and if we can't provide any answers, then obviously we would make sure that we come back to you.
Thank you, Louise. Okay, so we've got the overview, which is in the portrait, on the portrait pages, and then we've got the appendices. I believe that the appendices are a amplification of the overview. So any questions or comments on either section? I think yes, Beth.
On page 19 in the original plan, we're talking about changing the way we work and being the best we can be. We have a huge elderly population who don't all do digital services, and we need to make sure we make provision for those that are not able and not willing to use digital services adequately. And how do we let them know that we've got services that meet their needs? I'm not one of them, of course.
You're certainly not digitally challenged, clearly. But you're absolutely right. There are residents who are not able to gain access to, or are unfamiliar with, or are concerned about using online and digital services. And we do strive to ensure that there's access by other means. I don't know whether, Louise, you want to say anything about how members of the public who don't engage with us digitally are able to
Yep.
know what's out there, what's on offer.
I think what it is, it's about trying to use our volunteer and charity groups as best we can so that we spread the word through different forums that we're in. It's making sure that we've got set communications that we're sharing into our teams so that they are able to share that information and then share again, because I think it is that thing of, obviously from the point of view of isolation for the elderly, sometimes bringing people into those different forums, being able to obviously then share information there. I think we're always looking for opportunities, and I think that sort of came up through the work we've been doing around equalities, the community's vision, the council plan, when we've been out talking with different parts of our community, because yes, we have had a digital presence to get that feedback, but we've also known that going out and actually speaking to people and being in the room with people and talking to them also gets a sort of more of a quality sort of feedback. So I think it's using those avenues that we've worked up to then hopefully use to then be able to spread the word so if someone's not digitally set up.
A good example of that, I think, would be the work we've been doing with Social Care Future, which is about listening to the users of social care services and carers. And that has revealed different ways in which we need to adapt to recognise different levels of need and different levels of familiarity and access to online and digital.
Thank you.
Pauline.
A couple of things struck me while reading this. The first thing is that I think there's something missing. So one of the fundamentals that we need in order to run this council is strong financial performance and maintaining our reserves. And that really isn't in here at all. And without that, you can't do anything in this list at all. So I think the plan is very much about delivering stuff, but it doesn't talk very much about how that's going to be enabled, and so I think that's missing. And also, it's got a great list of things that we've done, but you lose a sense of scale. So you lose an understanding of I'm here and I want to get here and I've actually got to here. You see I'm here, you're saying all these things we've done, but there's no view of where you're trying to get to and how far you think you've got. So it probably needs I'm not talking about this one because I think this one's done, but I think next time you need a starting point, a target, and an understanding of how far you've got towards the target in each of those areas, and you need to reflect the underpinning financial thing, which I think is probably the most important objective in a way, because without that you can't do anything else.
Well, I couldn't agree more on that point about the absolutely central importance of sound finances and being in a financially robust enough situation to be able to deliver services for residents. And I think there's general agreement across the council that is vital. There may not always be agreement on how we get there, but there's agreement on that need. I think it's not reflected in this report simply because the report is structured around the specific asks in the 2020 version of the council plan. That wasn't prominent there. Again, it's one of those things I think that in 2020 was assumed, it was given as read. And I think over the last few years, not least because of the really serious inflation in 2022, that really had a big impact on us and on many other councils, I think we've become even more aware of what I think we took for granted in the past, that sound finances are an absolutely central feature of everything we do. And as we've seen councils fall over, going to 114 measures, our relative financial strength has been brought into even sharper relief. So I completely endorse the point you're making on that, Pauline.
Can I just support, Chair, that I will make sure that, again, from an officer's perspective, that when we're coming and reporting, that is definitely the approach that we'll be looking at, is through those smart sort of objectives and then being able to demonstrate the things that we've done. Because as I say, in the overview sessions that we've had with you developing that new council plan, that's definitely been the feedback that we've been receiving. So, yeah.
fair to say that the new plan will be different from the old and reported to you in a different way.
Andrew.
Sort of related to your point earlier, I was just wondering, in a general sense, this is a really good list of all the achievements and things made. Would you say that, are there any standouts from the old council plan which you think weren't achieved or haven't been delivered as we would have wanted?
Very good question, Andrew. And I'm in that luxurious position of not feeling any special sense of ownership of the old council plan because it wasn't one that I had a part in drawing up. Obviously, there have been some refreshes, but they've been mainly cosmetic, just to keep the plan going until the new the new plan was ready. So I'm not exactly sure I can comment on that. I'd be amazed if there aren't things that weren't achieved. It is in the nature of all organisations that you have ambitions, some of which are not going to be realised, either because of resource constraints, changing circumstances, all sorts of reasons why something may not get done in the way one hoped it would have done. And as I said in the introduction, the world changed rather dramatically in the course of the old council plan. COVID completely derailed all sorts of ambitions, and it led to obviously a very different environment. The inflationary surge of 2022, which we're still living with because it's obviously baked into the system now, all of that also is not particularly conducive to the realisation of all one's ambitions, most of which were hatched before that inflation really took off. So we have to recognise, I suppose, circumstances changed, and that will inevitably mean some of the fine ambitions of 2020 weren't easily realisable. But there's a lot in here that was realised, and I guess we can take a few moments to celebrate the things that were done well, and I think there were a lot of those. So I think the general record, looking back on it, is pretty positive.
I was just going to say, if that's okay. I mean, I agree. I think there's lots of positives, and it's not necessarily a huge criticism of it. I just think possibly when we look at the next one, whether an acknowledgement of what hasn't been able to be achieved, because I think there's sometimes when things change, it's absolutely acceptable to say, actually, this has fallen off the priority list within 5 years, and it's not something, and that's fine. But I think as a kind of reflection, it's sometimes good to see that. Obviously, I wasn't here when it was formulated, and lots of things have changed. So I think it's quite right to say that some things won't have been done, and that's absolutely fine. But it might be nice to have that again for a future one to see.
I think that's a very good point, and I think it is something we can take on board, a bit of perhaps expectation management as much as anything else.
You're right, if I just very quickly add, and that was what the other thing, and again, I may have mentioned this already, so I apologise, but that's why we also want to align the KPIs into the themes of the new council plan, because then we're quarterly looking at actually how we are then sort of measuring against those different themes. And I appreciate it's something that we're working on at the moment, but I just wanted to add that in as well.
Shahid next.
Thank you. I think it is only realistic, right, that we set a plan for 5 years. We live in the real world, and everything is not going to be recognised, achieved, right, because of the uncertainties, because of the changes that happens in the private sector as well as the, public sector as well. That's inevitable. All the things highlighted. I was just wondering, right, obviously there's a lot of positive things here which you can see has happened, and probably some things which you planned. It'll be good to see what didn't get materialised as well. But I'm just thinking back 5 years. What would we say are the lessons learned? And if we were to do for the next 5 years, what would we do differently?
purely impressionistic, and it's not a question I was prepared for. But to me, it seems the biggest lesson of all, going back to the context that I was describing earlier on, is Woking Borough Council has proved a remarkably resilient organisation under enormous stress and pressure, with the lowest level of core revenue support of any council offering the same range of services. It's a remarkable achievement to have come through some of these really difficult times. We're not over difficult times, they're still with us, and they will continue with us, I fear. But there is something optimistic to take out of this. When you look at what was thrown at the council, that the council didn't go under in the way some organisations have done. It's still got a healthy level of reserves. It's still got sound financial management. It is partly down to having a good set of, extremely good set of officers. It's having a good set of councillors who recognise that we have to make some tough decisions some of the time. We can't just live beyond our means. And I think, you know, all of that together, plus a brilliant voluntary and charitable sector with whom we're working more and more closely, other partners out there in the community with whom we've forged good connections over the last few years, including the University of Reading as a major strategic partner now. These are all big pluses that, to me, are very, very much indications of a really robust, strong and resilient organisation. And that's the biggest lesson I take out of this, looking back on it. I mean, when you can have a retrospective look, I mean, it's not often we get the chance to do that. It actually is a reminder of some of the things achieved against the most unpromising of backdrops.
I think everything you said I take on board. We recognise that. But the question was, I'm not sure that the question I was thinking was, now we're thinking next 5 years ahead, what the plan needs to be. Are we saying we'll do exactly the same thing what we did in the last 5 years? No. And the question was looking ahead, right? What would we do differently? I know it's a difficult one to actually, because in the next 4 years, 5 years, we probably don't know what something is going to come in our way, right? But I thought it would be useful to just have a bit of hindsight and just saying, look, these are the lessons we learned at high level, and given the opportunity, we slightly could modify the plan or implementation, or we could perhaps do it differently to get a better outcome. Because at the end of the day, what we're doing is trying to impact people's life or residents' life in a positive way. Now the question is, have we actually done that? How far have we gone? And actually, how can we, what could we do differently to impact their lives in a more even positive way?
If I can just add from an officer's perspective and some of the changes we've definitely made. I think it's our approach around consultation. I think that's been a massive lesson learned that we've definitely taken on board. Definitely in 2022 when we commenced the community's vision approach. It was very much going out and talking to our communities, understanding what they wanted to see, appreciating still we have finite budgets, and so obviously you can't make promises on everything. So it's making sure you're having that balanced conversation, but you also know then that the content of that conversation isn't just driven through from the council, it's being driven from partners, businesses, individuals, communities, and all sorts of everybody shaping it. And then we've used that model to then shape then the new council plan and the new EDI policy as well, so that again, that's been a really big learning, I think, for us on our approach to make sure then that we can say that voice is in there. So I would definitely say that was a big change.
Just if I can just come back in, because I think you've raised a really interesting point, Shahid, that deserves a bit of conversation. It strikes me that one of the challenges of any plan, any council plan, is you're setting out your ambitions for a period ahead, 10 years or more. And you know, things will, you are to some extent in control of your destiny. If you don't have a plan, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know where you're going, if you have no vision of what you want to achieve, you certainly won't achieve anything. But you have to be flexible enough to recognise a lot is thrown at you that you have no control over. Things happen outside your areas of control that will have a big impact on what you do and what we do as an organisation, whether that's from government, other councils, other bodies, international affairs, all sorts of things have an impact. As the inflation of 2022 revealed, it doesn't even have to be homegrown, it can be as a result of international conflict. So we have to recognise, however great our ambitions and however much we may have a clear vision of what we want to do, create inclusive communities, that to me is the kind of driving vision that all this hangs around. We're not completely in control of our own destiny. Things happen. And the nature of planning is that it emphasises the things you want to do and how you're going to do them, but it never can quite capture the uncertainties of the world, the things that change, the things that you can't control.
Just last point, if I may, right? When EDI we talked about, Louise, obviously I remember 5 years ago we talked about there are certain communities in our borough which are not included, and they're not being, how can we include them? And obviously several steps have been taken. I've been a number of those meetings as well. But 5 years down the line, I'm just thinking still there are certain communities which are not actually fully, involved in the process. As you said, the different stakeholders, right? So the learning is how can we include those, right? And what we could do differently to make sure that all our, citizens, our residents, their voices are heard and we're not excluded. Obviously, in the process, in the 5 years, we've seen several new communities have come, some of them, so include those as well. Some of the existing ones are there, but they perhaps were not included as a, as a stakeholder at the earlier on. How can we do it differently? So these are things I was looking.
And I go back to a point that Beth made right at the beginning about, how do we reach the people who aren't digitally savvy? But that's part of a bigger question about how do we reach the hard-to-reach groups, the people who don't naturally engage with the council, who perhaps look on the council with suspicion, rather than as a provider of services. They're suspicious. They're reluctant to engage. And I do think something that Louise said earlier is really important. We've learnt so much from the way we went about the community's vision. The engagement with really difficult to reach groups has taught us a lot about how we need to engage better in the future and how we need to consult in a way that genuinely captures the cross-section of the community that we need to reach, not just the views of certain segments of it, which are already well known to us. I mean, some people are very good at communicating to the council, but others, we don't hear their voices, and it's hearing those voices that is important. And that is something we're striving to do. We've still got a long way to go, as you quite rightly said.
Can I just quickly add, and just to add from what Stephen was saying, and I think it's also saying that just because the policies now in, we're not stopping that engagement. The engagement is absolutely continuous and needs to be part of what we're doing and through the different VCS groups that we're already engaged with. And I know that's part of the expectation as officers that we build that in to the things that we are actually doing. And I think it becomes part and parcel of sort of that every day.
Dave.
I just think that we need to make sure that our culture's right in the sense that we're not afraid to acknowledge where we fail and learn from that failure, because in learning from that failure is where we grow and where we'll develop and where we're achieve the most and provide the biggest improvements in the service we're offering residents. So I just think we need to be, it's okay to fail.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that is an important message to convey. We do want people to be innovative and inventive and think about different ways of doing things that may or may not succeed. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, that imperative is even greater now in a world where, you know, we have to recognise resources are going to be constrained. I think we really do need to think inventively about how we can get the best value out of things, how we can do things in a better and more efficient way. So our staff are our greatest resource, not least because they have great ideas, some of which will work, some of which won't. And I'm completely on the same page with you that this is something we want to do. But cultural change, or the culture of an organisation obviously takes time to change. But in a completely different way, the culture, I think, is beginning to change in the sense that throughout the organisation there's a much greater recognition than there was a few years ago of the need to work with others outside the organisation and to need to work more closely with different departments and directorates within the organisation. So we're getting partnership working, operating now on a much higher level, both internally, between different departments and directorates to solve corporate problems, and we're getting it working more effectively externally with all of our myriad of partners, business, voluntary and charitable sector, university, health providers, and the police, the whole range of them. I think we are upping our game all the time on that because we have to. We absolutely have to.
That's really good to hear that. And I think it's just getting that mentality of not thinking, if you do a report, I have to make this organisation look as great as it possibly can and try and sort of minimise any and brush under the carpet anything that hasn't gone quite perfectly and sort of try and buoy up everything and more think of it from a, you know, what are we going to get where the benefit is. And I think it is a difficult change, I think, but it's something that people shouldn't be afraid of. And we should create an environment where they don't feel afraid of that.
Pauline.
Thanks. Just going back to the consultation point, I think we need to be a little bit careful. I think my experience of the majority of residents is they don't want to talk to the council because they haven't got any problems. And the times they want to talk to the council is when you're doing something they don't like, which is usually changing something, even if it's a good thing or a bad thing, they generally don't like change. There is a real danger that when you consult, you've got the issue with people who are hard to reach and you can't talk to and can't have electronic connection, or, you know, are just generally people that are very difficult to get opinions out of. But the vast majority of people are very difficult to get opinions out of because they just want government to get out of their face and let them to get on with their lives. And I think there's a very grave danger of assuming that people who are saying nothing are out of the picture. Sometimes the only time they say something is when they're not happy. And I just think we need to temper any consultation results with that knowledge that you only get people with an opinion that respond, and you don't get the 80% of people who really don't care. And I just think we need to bear that in mind. The other point I was going to make was one of the things for presenting this, which might help in future, is if you use sort of sliders. So you've got this is where we are, this is where we're trying to get to, and you can show graphically where you've got to, so you can know. It's a better way of showing it than a list, I think.
On the second point, maybe Louise can talk on that, but on your first point about consultation eliciting responses when people feel exercised about a subject and usually against any form of change, I think that's broadly true, but it's also reflective of who we are able to reach in our consultations. They tend to be people, all of the data we've got suggests it's overwhelmingly people who are middle-aged or elderly, who already own their own homes, already in fairly comfortable circumstances, and change is not something they relish because they feel reasonably comfortable and happy with their lives as they are. They don't really want things to be disrupted and change. But although those people's view is absolutely valid and we need to hear it, there are other people who will often benefit from changes who we don't often hear from. There are really quite significant generational differences in the way people view things. At the moment, most of our consultations are overwhelmingly skewed by the voices of those middle-aged and elderly people who feel they want to defend what they have. And we do need to hear also from the people who feel they would like things to change.
To come back on that, I think you're right. But I think we just got to remember that before we get carried away, we've got, I don't know, 120,000 residents in this borough, something like that, maybe more. 180,000, thank you, it is more. We've been building some more houses, haven't we, recently? So 180,000 residents, and if we get a response of 400 on a consultation, we think it's a lot. So we just need to measure it. I'm not saying we should ignore it, I'm just saying we should take it in context.
Yeah, I think so. But the ambition is to get to a point where we aren't just reliant on conventional online consultations, which do tend to be responded to by the same group of people. There are some people who do like responding to our consultations, all of them in fact. But there are many who don't, and we need to just try and devise, and working on this, a better method of capturing the cross-section of views that are on that, so we can hear those views and take those views properly into account when we make decisions. I'm sorry, I've said all that without I don't think anybody out there is going to really be agreeing.
All I was going to add is to say, yeah, we are absolutely looking at that. And I think it's also using the different departments where we've got different events that are happening. So we are talking very specifically to different parts of the population, like schools, for example, using those opportunities. And I know you can't do loads of that, you can't go over the top with it, but it is using those opportunities to maybe get those younger voices involved. I know something when we've talked about the council plan, it was sometimes those that were working age, and we did find going to the leisure centres was a good place for us to go and talk. You know, it was a different demographic that we were definitely talking to. The other point about, I appreciate you've sort of touched on this, but it's also our partners doing the talking on our behalf. So it's not, because I appreciate what you were saying about not wanting to talk to the council, it's how we get our partners to help us share that that sort of vision and that sort of way. So again, I know that's what we've been working on, and I've taken a note about the approach on how we report things. So we'll most definitely sort of have a look at that. And I think, you know, it may be in the first year we try some different things, and I don't mean that I'm not looking for I want consistency from the point of view of the data. I think that's important, but we can try some different styles and things out. That's why we come into overview and scrutiny, to get that viewpoint, so we can be open to we'll provide something and we can build on it, I think is probably where I'm coming from.
Alison.
Thank you. So I'm looking on page 30, and I appreciated the achievements where it was possible to detail a figure to show what we'd achieved over a 5-year, the period of the vision. And it says accepted a homeless duty to 2,132 households, which is obviously a very sad, huge amount of local families without a home. And it says we secured accommodation for 384 households and helped secure accommodation for a further 783. So that's a total of 1,167. So what about the 1,000 households that we weren't helping? What happens with them? Is this somewhere where we're definitely going to be, hopefully in the next 5 years, we will have had, be able to state that all of the households we'd had a duty for, we were able to help? Or is there something I'm missing in this?
Well, no, if you're missing it, I'm missing it too. I'm not entirely sure how these figures are compiled, and what they actually, some of this means. It's slightly puzzling to me. That 2,132 households is presumably over that 5-year period. The 384 and the 780 secure accommodation for 783. I think I would need to interrogate that a bit more. I mean, we have managed at various points to reduce the number of people who are in need, who are presenting as homeless, really down to a very low figure indeed, but it does bounce back up, and there's a seasonal pattern to it as well, I'm afraid. And we did get an enormous surge of homelessness claims on the back of the no-fault evictions. And then we've also had quite a lot of landlords, private landlords, leaving the market because of changes in the tax regime, or because of inflationary pressures. They feel they need to extract more rent, and they've used that no-fault eviction as a way of getting tenants out. And quite often, except in a homeless duty, those may be people presenting. It doesn't mean they'll all become homeless. That's one way in which you could interpret this, because they present as homeless, but some will not actually become homeless. They will actually find accommodation through private rental without our having to intervene. But I need to excavate that a bit more, so I'll try and get some information for you on that.
So the other thing that might impact that, depending on what that figure actually means, is that you can bid for housing in any place, even if you don't live there. And I've got no roots there, so whether that 2,000 is... So the people are categorised in 4 categories, I believe, and depending on which category you're in, it depends on whether you're likely to get council housing.
That was the case in 2022. It is no longer the case. A local connection test was introduced.
Oh, no, there was always a local connection test. But you can still ask. There's nothing to stop you asking. And we register, I mean, when I looked after housing, which was a while ago, I agree, we got a lot of people starting at the top of the funnel, and, you know, they maybe bid for Maidenhead and Wokingham and Reading and Slough, and so they're multiple counts of the same people.
Yeah.
And that might be the other thing that's causing that. I'm not saying it is, but it's possible.
No, but that's entirely possible. I think the simple fact is we need to excavate the figures and try and understand what they actually mean.
I think it's Chris.
Yeah, I did just have one other question.
Well, no, it's Chris now.
Below the bit I quoted, it said about homes first, buying self-contained properties and helping people. And I'm ignorant. I hadn't heard about that before, and I just wondered sort of how many homes have been bought over the 5 years.
Well, I can't give you that figure off the top of my head, I'm afraid, Alison. Again, some of this relates to a period before I was involved in housing myself, which is only since 2022. The council has done various things to try and sustain tenancy. It's actually got a really excellent set of officers in its tenancy sustainment team, because obviously if you can sustain somebody in their tenancy, keep them there, help them to manage their finances in a way that enable them to keep paying their rents, then they don't present as homeless. And that is really important. Rough sleepers, there are all sorts of initiatives. Some of this, we get some money from government to help us with rough sleepers. Some of it we don't. Unfortunately, our homelessness prevention grant, which is has been a really important tool for us, was cut quite significantly by 37% this last year. So we're trying to do this really important and difficult work with less resource and less support from central government than we had. So that is unfortunate, but we will. I'll try and get you a bit more detail on that.
Chris.
Yep, just looking at all of these priorities, and they are really key priorities. Do we feel that this helps us to sort of be more transparent on where we're being squeezed? Do we feel this really helps us to identify those areas where we're having to prioritise and go, well, these things are vital that we have to deliver, and at least then where we're not delivering, does this help us then to go, we're not delivering that yet, but this is still on our radar to drive forward? Do we feel that is helpful with this plan?
I think when we move to the new plan, it will certainly be important that we focus on achieving what is achievable in constrained circumstances. The theme that we've pursued over the last few years in the face of financial pressure has been, I suppose, threefold. First, trying to focus our limited resources on helping those who need help most. Second, trying to engage in as much prevention, early intervention, and invest to save as we can in order to try and reduce financial pressure on us downstream. And third, trying to work more closely with others outside the organisation as well as to work more effectively within the organisation to try and make our resource go as far as it can go. So sometimes it's a matter of pooling expertise, knowledge, experience, as well as money and person power to try and achieve things. And that will involve working with others to do that. So that has been a kind of theme over the last few years. It will continue to be, I'm sure, as we continue in difficult financial circumstances. But obviously there are a set of responsibilities we have which are statutory, which must be delivered. There's some flexibility about how and to what extent they're delivered. But the amount of discretionary spend the council has is under pressure year on year on year. It's not as though we've started from a position where there's lots and lots of fat in the system to be trimmed out. We've had successive years of having to make really quite substantial savings. And that task gets more and more difficult every year that passes because you've gone past a low-hanging fruit that was gone ages ago. Not even a giraffe can reach most of the fruit we need to get at now. So I don't know if that helps, but it's all of this planning as much as we can plan, and with all the caveats added that came out of the conversation with Shahid earlier on. Planning is a good way of trying to make sure that we use the resource we've got as wisely and effectively as we can.
And can I just add, from an officer's perspective, the council plan is used as, obviously that's the most strategic document, but then sitting underneath each of that you've got your directorate plans, your service plans, which are then cascading into people's objectives. So just being really clear that messaging is very key within the organisation. And obviously when challenges come or something is different, we have to sort of maybe look at, changing what that approach is. But it's always about referring up and through and back and down to make sure that we are still looking to achieve what we said we would achieve.
Yep. I think also what I'm trying to say is the fact that it's on the plan shows that it is our priority, and even if we can't do it, is it that we're trying to demonstrate that we at least care and are aspiring to achieve these things, even if sometimes constraints stand in our way?
I think yes, is the short answer. We are setting out what we would like to achieve, but with that caveat that we know circumstances may prevent us doing so in some cases.
Shahid, I think you've got something.
Can I just go back to the point which we were discussing earlier on regarding where the challenges are? And Stephen, you mentioned, that people who are in the middle life, right? They get their houses, they're quite comfortable, they don't want to make any changes. What we're seeing is that pressures are on the elderly side, and also the people who are younger. That's where a lot of the resources are going as well. But also there's another angle as well, which I'm not sure whether this has been considered or perhaps we should consider, right, is what we're finding is, according to figures, we have a lot of graduates in the borough. 1/3 of them actually are not getting the jobs which requires graduation and graduate level. Why? Because they don't have the right skills. This is 1/3. This is official statistics. I was just, looking it up only a few days ago. Obviously, they are, under huge debt, but they don't have the right skills. It's not that they're not jobs. Jobs are there, but they don't have the right skills, and employers are not willing to spend because of their own pressures and financial pressures of them. So I'm just thinking in all this mix. I don't have a solution to this, right? But I'm just thinking loudly here. Can we, as a council, help them in a way to working with our partners, university, employers? I do feel, as a council, we have a lot of clout, but I'm not sure whether we are using that clout, right, to actually help those, which is 1/3, is quite a considerable number. Because once they have got actually fully trained, they will be, generating so much, and obviously benefit not only personally for them, but to hold to the economy as well. So that seems to be, I'm not seeing anywhere all the, looking whether how can we help them? Can we help them? If yes, how can we help them? Not only for themselves, but actually, but also for the wider residents as well.
Well, you raise a good point. Obviously, this is a retrospective look on the past, not a look into the future. But what I can say is I referred earlier on to strategic partnership with the University of Reading. One of the work streams in that is employment and skills. And we are working very closely with the university on this, developing ways in which we can try and help employability and skills for younger people, whether they're graduates or not, apprenticeships, a whole range of skill levels that we want to try and cater for. And we try to do that also with when we're giving planning permission to new employers, we try to build in local skills packages into the planning process as well. So there are things going on that are attempts to try and address the issue you're referring to, which I think is a major cause of concern. But it's not going to be visible here, and it's not, to be quite honest, going to be visible in the new council plan. But it is happening. I can assure you of that.
Sorry, can I just come back? I just want to clarify, because we hear a lot about apprenticeships, and apprenticeship is a very long-term thing. It's not something which this could deliver us in 6 months, 1 year, it's several years you're talking about, right? Also, I might say something which may be controversial, but actually that is factually true as well, that the current academic system we have in the country is not fit for purpose for what actually the country needs. There's a lot of good models actually we can learn from, and where a lot of practical skills are built in the academic courses. And in the country, we doesn't do that. That's it. Obviously, that's not for us to change that, but what I'm saying is, so what we're looking for, particularly I was highlighting, is the people are coming out, but they need some, like a boot camp training type, right? 6 months, give them the skills which are required, and then give them, up and go. They are much more effective, in the short term, because apprenticeship, we've been talking about apprenticeship, God knows for how many decades now, but they're not delivering what actually the economy needs. They're a long-term thing. Yes, they're good, but they're a long-term thing, but not actually always wholly the solution what is required. So I'm just thinking, how can, as a council, because they are our residents, if we can help them using our contacts and our cloud, right, then we should be doing that. I hope this makes it clear what I was saying.
Well, it won't entirely surprise you to know I have views on education, but I think we should avoid the temptation to lump all employers together and assume what some want and need is what all want and need. It isn't. Yes, there's, of course, there's a demand for vocationally trained specialist skills, but there's also a demand for generalists, people who are trained, their minds are trained up to deal with problems, to deal with challenges, and they are readily transferable skills that can be used in lots of different employment environments. So I think we need to have the full spectrum of opportunities out there in our educational system. I'm sure there are things that could be done to improve educational opportunities and employability. But we are working with a university which is also the host to a really world-class business school, which is giving us advice pretty well free of charge at the moment, because they in return are getting the benefits in their research profile. So we have got a good relationship there that is starting to bring dividends. Could we do more? Of course. Yes, there's always more that can be done. But I don't think we should underestimate what is being done.
Any more questions on the review of the plan? Oh, great. Lovely. So we've finished that. So it's on to the forward programme. Executive Forward Programme 2025-26, June 2025 update, which is on page 35. Does anyone have any observations about this? Thank you, Louise. Yeah, yes, Pauline, sorry.
It was a general comment. I think we said last time that we didn't think there was very much on this, and Neil went away to see what he could find, and there still doesn't seem to be very much on it.
Well, I think he has found some things. Do you want to speak to it, Neil?
All I can say is I did pass back the message from the committee, and the leader is here this evening, and I'm sure he received the message, and that's all I can say.
What I can say is this is a wholly accurate record of what's coming up on the 24th of July. I know that for certain. Obviously, there are things that will occur, and things will end up getting added. Some things do end up getting taken off because reports are not ready, further information is required. It is by its very nature, I'm afraid, a bit of a moving feast. But we are doing our best to try and improve the visibility of what's coming up. There's still clearly still more work to be done looking at this document.
Yeah, because it looks to me like you're not going to be doing anything after July until December, more or less, apart from the regular revenue monitoring, treasury monitoring, and capital monitoring. There's nothing on there apart from Grace Farm Sports Club between the July meeting and the end of the year, which sounds a bit unlikely.
It is a bit unlikely. Obviously, there are some regular items, financial reporting being the most obvious key performance indicators, but there will be other reports that will be coming in and populating this, I'm quite sure. I think, given that what we have here, and given Neil has asked very nicely, I think the least I can do is go away and try and get you some more information. Strangely enough, we were in our informal executive meeting earlier this evening discussing the very same subject.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, haven't got the microphone on. Any more comments? Page 36, 37, 38, 39 and 40. Okay, on to the draft work programmes. Any comments on page 42? Page 43? Page 44? Page 45? Page 46? Page 47?
Sorry, on page
Sorry.
46, I think possibly the implementation of the Helping Early strategy, it's not actually just for the town of Early, is it?
It's still helping early.
I think this was raised at the meeting as well, wasn't it? Yeah. I think it was when we went through it on children's services, I think it came up. But yeah. I think that should be changed on the children's one, but yeah.
Neil says it's partially right. It's right in one column. It has given us a lot of amusement, though, that.
Catherine, maybe we could take this the other way around. If we look down all these lists and see all these worthy papers and that they're not generating any activity at executive, then we might wonder what the papers are there for. So it might be a good way of slimming down the amount of work the council's got to do if it's never going to deliver anything. Maybe, and I know everything doesn't end up in executive, but maybe we should be looking at it and saying, well, if it's coming onto this list, what's the conclusion? If there isn't any likely action from it, why is it on this? And should we get rid of it and stop the work?
Well, I imagine that the thinness of, say, September the 18th on the on the executive programme is because there's an entire August holiday before that. And presumably something's going to come up for them to...
Nothing in this council gets delivered in a month.
Well, that's true.
So we should know about it. They should be working on it. Or maybe they're not, in which case maybe we shouldn't be discussing things that are never going to go anywhere.
So we can't really get his...
No.
But perhaps we should...
I just wonder, Neil, if you could if you could look through the reports and just ask the officers what they're intending to do at the end of these reports and whether they're actually going to cause any action, because if they're not, we really shouldn't be spending money on them.
Mm.
I was going to add with that as well. I think because there are times when we're bringing things to committees where it says that, yes, it will be discussed at executive, and sometimes there's a decision is made on the executive. Sometimes there is an indication about which meeting, but not always. So I think it's good. Sometimes that depends on the urgency of when you want to bring it to the committee, but also I think that the Spencerswood Primary School is a good case where I was under the impression that was going to September executive, which was why I wanted to bring it to the June meeting or whenever we had it. But it's not on there now. Whether it will appear on there before the September meeting, I don't know. But that was what I was led to believe, was a decision would be made at that meeting, which is why I wanted to bring it. So that's kind of...
I think that's the question, isn't it? That are there things like that, you could use that as an example, in the pipeline for the executive meeting?
There seems to be a bit of a lack of coordination, doesn't there?
So maybe we should have a wait list, which is things that we know are coming, but we don't know when. And then that might force dates out of people. So if they see this sort of smelling heap of things that have got no date, but are looking like they need a decision, they might pay more attention to when it's actually going to go to executive.
Yeah, sort of orphan things.
A wait list.
Well, I think some. I mean, we've done it with children. Sometimes it's have a list of, these are the things we need to do at some point and fit them in. And I suspect there is a long list for executive of the things which will go on. But even having a list at the bottom of executive, even if it's not slotted into meetings, but yes, saying, these are all the things which will be coming. So at least we can see them on the horizon as well. Because I think one of the other things for planning work for the committees is to be able to know what's on the horizon with the executive as well, which I know we do with the exec members to a certain extent, but seeing that going forward as well just can make sure everything's on all of our horizons well enough, because I don't think it's good enough really to, for example, I can't remember when the next of this commit, but for our next meeting, maybe to be, if it's early September or something, then to come up and say, oh, actually next week the executive meeting has 7 items on the agenda now, and there's not time to sort of prepare with that.
To come back on my other suggestion, if we look at this list, got page 42, we've got a devolution LGR. Is there going to be an executive decision out of that or not? If there is, then it should be on the wait list, potentially. If there isn't, we shouldn't be discussing it, probably. So it's those sorts of things. I think we need to start slimming down the amount of papers that, and I know that's not my job, I'm meant to be opposing, not trying to run the place, but we need to start slowing down the worthy papers that don't have any activity relating to them.
Some of them come to council, though, don't they?
Sorry?
Some of them come to council.
Very few.
Oh, okay. Right.
So I'm just worried that we're creating an industry of very interesting papers that aren't actually causing any activity and therefore won't have any effect. Now, maybe they don't all go to executive, I understand, but there seems to be an awful lot of paperwork, but not very much executive action.
Well, I think we should take an action to start a list of items that are coming to scrutiny that haven't yet come up to the timetable for.
Maybe there's a commitment that it goes onto the executive agenda within the X number of months of going to scrutiny.
I think the first step is look at what's on the scrutiny list and ask the question of the person who owns it, the officer, is this going to require an executive decision at some point? The question then is, if the answer is no, what is the point of this paper? If it has a point, fine. If it hasn't got a point, get rid of it. And then, if it is going to come to executive, put it on the wait list and wait for them to come up with a date. And I think that would make a much more joined-up process.
Whether or not in that system it would make sense on the forward programmes of committees to add a column which suggests whether or not that decision is being, and when it will come, so you can look through a committee and say, actually, because some of the, I'm just looking at the children's one again, some of the standing items, yeah, they don't go to executive because they're just sort of monitoring things, but yes, to see with some of the others, actually, is it going to executive and when would, again, maybe help focus the intentions of it.
It'll join it all up a bit more. Otherwise, it feels like a load of disparate lists. And I am concerned that officers are working on stuff that actually has got no output and no value, which is the other thing I'm worried about. That's probably the thing I'm most worried about, that we're putting a lot of effort into something that isn't going to cause any change.
That's another column you've got to add to the tables, Neil. You'll enjoy that, won't you? Alison.
So the executive at their meeting this week are going to be approving the new council plan for 25 to 30. And then at our February meeting, we're going to be scrutinising progress against the priorities in that plan. Well, you know, we know from KPIs, etc., it takes time to pull together the data to be able to see, you know, how things are achieving. And I don't understand how we could scrutinise progress of a plan that started in late July at the start of February. That's
when
only,
we are also doing the KPIs as well. So perhaps that's...
Well, I mean, I can understand the point of us scrutinising progress against priorities in the council plan next July, when it's been there for a year. But between the end of July and the start of February...
That's probably a good thing to...
That doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
Postpone, yeah. Beth.
Thank you. If I could put my HOSC hat on for a moment, if I look at the HOSC list, those things on there will never come to executive, and there are things on there that are only relevant to that committee. And so I think we really do need to rethink what we're doing with these forward plans and what we want to get out of them. And I think it might be an idea to have something offline where we sit together around a table and thrash out what we want rather than what we're being given. I don't know how the others feel about that. I mean, there's a big thing coming to HOSC about the changes at the ICB, but to be honest, that's nothing to do with the executive. Yeah, they can't change it, they can't influence.
They might have to react to the results. So if you get rid of the ICB and ditch all the work on us with none of the money, I suspect that's going to cause an executive problem of some description.
Yeah, I mean, it's just shuffling it about, really, Pauline. It's joining it with Barks, Bucks and Oxen rather than anything like that. And until the ICB have fully understood those changes, we won't know anything about them. So
I believe it's also cutting the ICB's size in half, roughly, and
So-
devolving
sorry.
a lot of activity they have to us, which will require something being done. I'm not sure whether it will require an executive decision or not, but it's not something that isn't going to affect us.
it will affect our residents, it will affect us, but I'm not sure it will affect the executive.
I think on the basis that it'll have half the money with all the work, it probably will.
No. So I think we need to rethink possibly what we're trying to do with the forward plans, and that probably means a bit of a brainstorm between us.
Yeah, but if we, the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, are looking at the agendas of the various committees, we need to know what other things those meetings are going to be dealing with, because we don't want to overload them with loads of stuff when they've got stuff like the thing you just...
So why don't we start with the basic question, which is it going to go to executive at some point? And if not, what's it for? You know, what...
And there may be an answer to that.
There's a pretty good answer. Yeah, a lot of them have got a fair answer. No, it's not going to go to executive, but it is important because... And then the question mark then is the things that aren't going to go to executive and we can't work out what they're for either. And that might be the ones you cull.
Could I just clarify, members will be aware that the committees have got the powers to make recommendations to the executive. So even if something is not on the executive forward programme, the scrutiny committees can get it on there by making recommendations appropriately.
Okay, any other observations?
Could I ask a question about page 52, which is the climate emergency ONS and their January meeting, where the item is a presentation and the purpose is to receive a presentation from an external expert?
Well, we didn't know...
It seems very, hush-hush, need to know, but what is it?
It's hush-hush because when this was written, Neil didn't know who the expert was. And in fact, the expert hasn't even replied to the email yet. So we can't mention his name. Somebody has been approached.
But there must be a certain topic that the committee wants to challenge or scrutinise, and that's why you need an expert. Is that what it is?
The way the committee works is that we're inviting experts on various topics. But as you know, experts are not necessarily free on the day that you want them. So that's why it's a bit cryptic. I mean, but I can tell you that somebody has been invited to talk about something that we're very interested in. But, yeah.
Should we sell tickets?
Well, you don't even have to pay. You can just dial in.
That's this one. There'll be a tent in the box.
Yeah. Where are we? I mean, page 54, page 55, page 56, page 57, page 58, page 59, page 60, and Yes, Pauline?
Sorry, back on page 43.
We've passed that.
Is that update on partnership with VCS the thing that is going to give me the answer to the question I asked 2 years ago?
Hopefully.
Good, thank you. I'm remarkably impatient, actually.
I haven't had the, anyway. Thank you very much. I think the meeting is closed unless anyone's got any afterthoughts. No? Okay, thank you very much. You can go and watch the football if there's any of it left.